Hello, and welcome to Hedgehog Storytime, where I read my original fiction. The following story is part of the Edie Valley Project, linked to the playlist in the description below. Yes, you have to read them all. No, that is not a request.
It's back! Finally. I promised it would be back. Here it is, Edie Valley, in all its glory, and this week we're going to catch up with some old friends we haven't seen in a while. So without further ado, here is the Priestess, the Emperor, and the Empress. You want me to do what? Cindy blinked at Nico from across the dining room table. It was December, and finally the first real snow of the year was falling outside the frosted windows. Just, back me up, Nico shrugged. I'm gonna be going into some pretty dangerous turf, and I need all the firepower I can get. Cindy frowned. Well, what about Lila? She can take down pretty much anything, right? Besides, I got shit of my own to deal with. Like an ever-enigmatic quest for the truth, whatever that meant, and a long-lost brother who hadn't called her in the last 48 hours, she added to herself. I'm not worried about getting jumped, Nico explained. I'm just more concerned about being intimidating. This guy's not violent as far as I know, but a hard customer to crack. I just need him to know he means serious business. You're the spectacle, and I'm the steel, Lila added from between them as she took a bite out of an especially crunchy bagel, which sort of temporarily canceled out her badass persona. Shaking her head, Cindy folded her arms. Witchcraft isn't even remotely spectacular. I don't know what you expect me to do. Not spectacular, Nico scoffed. What do you call the fire that comes out of your friggin' hands, then? He wiggled his fingers dramatically. 5 out of 10? Lacked a certain pizzazz? Oh, that? It's not as great as you think it is. Cindy shuffled in her chair. I mean, it's fire, but look. She reached for the chain she kept around her neck and showed them the yellow-orange amulet that dangled from it. It works through one of these, but they don't have much power. I only had a little to work with, after all. Anything big will expend most of its juice. I mostly keep it for emergencies. Perfect. Wonderful. Listen, I don't care if it only burns at room temperature. Nico leaned towards her, grinning. I just need it to look like it's something. I don't know. Okay, how about this? If you use it all up, I'll get you the shit to make a new one free of charge. Better yet, a better one. Frowning, Cindy thought for a moment. She had a bad feeling about this. But at the same time, Nico and Lila had become her friends, and if they needed her help... All right, she said finally, sighing as she leaned forward on the table. You've got yourself a deal. Yes! Nico stood, rubbing his hands together in anticipation. This is the big one, ladies and, ladies. I think some celebration is in order. I'll go make some pancakes. Cindy raised an eyebrow. Pancakes? Why that, of all things? It's the only thing he knows how to make, Lila supplied. Hey, that's not true, Nico pouted. I've learned how to make a lot of stuff in the last couple of months. My apologies, young master. She bowed as much as she could while sitting. It's the only thing he knows how to make well. Nodding, Nico seemed satisfied. Much better, he replied, before disappearing into the kitchen. Once he was gone, Cindy turned to Lila. Are you sure you're okay with this? She asked. I feel like I'm kind of taking your job. Oh, no, Lila smiled. It was my idea, actually. She paused, looking back into the kitchen. I'm afraid Nico's getting a little in over his head with this one. People with guns I can and have dealt with, but this is something more along the lines of your expertise. I'd feel much more confident if you were there, for your knowledge, if nothing else. And are either of you actually going to tell me what it is we're walking into? Cindy asked. Lila sighed, as if she didn't quite believe what she was about to say. We're going to conduct business with a demon. Cindy blinked. Oh, shit. So it was with great reluctance the following afternoon after school that she met Nico and Lila at the house, and together they walked down to the old part of town. Lila had her katana strapped to her shoulder like a backpack, and certainly had several weapons besides on her. Though Nico seemed less armed, there were several suspicious lumps under his trench coat that Cindy suspected were guns. Cindy felt positively naked with only the fire amulet and the hasty protection charm she'd whipped up for the three of them last night. Meanwhile, Lila was feeling just as nervous, if not more so. She wasn't used to not being the toughest person in the room, and her every instinct was screaming to bodily grab Nico and run. But she didn't. Nico had found himself a real niche here, in this small, unimportant suburb, selling substances of an occult description, mostly just because this town was so gosh darn weird. With the exception of that one family down the street from the abandoned house, what were their names? The Jeffersons? She suspected that there wasn't a single ordinary person in the whole of Edie Valley. She knew that he'd been saving the money he'd been making until his 18th birthday rolled around and they could get a place that didn't have more cobwebs than a football player with a concussion. If he could get a demon in the chain of supply and command, that would be huge. But still, it was one of the more dangerous things she'd done in her life, right up there with trying to steal the watch off a rich mob kid with a heavily armed bodyguard. Demons, to put it lightly, weren't human. They didn't think like humans did, and most could probably tie her up in a knot of words before she'd even drawn her katana. Nico might fare better. He was good at that kind of thing. But Lila was afraid, even for him. Lila was so lost in thoughts that she didn't realize they'd reached their destination until the hum of the neon sign cut through the haze. Blinking, she saw with a start that she recognized the image of a scrubby goat. This was the bar right below the safe house. Ex-safe house. She glanced over to Nico and briefly caught his eye, trying to convey just how dangerous this was. True, it had been almost 4 months since the Vincent incident, but she was still paranoid that they might be recognized. Nico nodded, ever so slightly, probably telling her to keep her cool, and then carefully stepped over the threshold into the smiling goat. Apt name, Lila thought, almost bitterly as she followed suit with Cindy behind her, though she had no idea whether the proprietor had any real associations with the land down under. From the decor, it certainly didn't seem like it. If anything, the place had a worn-in feeling. Lila would have called it homely if not for the crawling feeling that something dangerous lurked in these walls. Nico gestured for the two of them to hold back, and Cindy and Lila obliged, glancing around the place while Nico approached the bartender, a tall, dark-haired kid with an exceptional amount of tattoos. He leaned on the counter conspiratorially, a smirk that seemed to say he already owned the place, painted on flawlessly. "I'm here to speak to the boss," he said softly, but firmly. "He knows we're coming." So far, so good, as the bartender nodded, but Lila shouldn't have dared to even think it, because just then Cindy happened to glance over at the bartender, her mouth dropped open, and she almost shouted, "Tommy?" And the spell was broken. They had lost the intimidating edge. They had ceased to be dark, mysterious strangers and had become teenagers playing as them. But surprisingly, the bartender didn't scowl or scoff. He looked kind of sheepish and almost a little scared. "Cindy," he said, "what are you doing here?" Swiveling back and forth between the two, Nico looked just as confused as Lila felt. "You two know each other?" "He's my brother," Cindy provided before turning back to the bartender, Tommy. "Why didn't you call?" Tommy began. "Wait, your brother?" Nico interrupted over the top of him. "I thought you only had one of those." She shrugged. "I thought I did until 2 days ago." "What does that even mean?" "It means," came a new voice, "that dramatic irony is still functioning as it should." All eyes turned as the black curtain at the back of the bar was pushed aside and a tall man with round spectacles slunk out. Said curtain was then nearly set on fire a second later out of sheer reflex. "Oh, hell no," Cindy said, a jet of flame separating her and the newcomer. "Not you two." "Cool your jets," Nico yelled. "Are you trying to set the place on fire?" "I would if it would burn this son of a bitch with it." The newcomer chuckled. "I'm a little tougher than that, I'm afraid." As Cindy hesitantly put out her flames, Lila took a small step forward, her hand twitching near the hilt of her katana. She could see why Cindy had reacted the way she did. There was something about this man that raised the hairs in the back of her neck. At first glance, he appeared harmless, even a little foppish with his dishwater blonde hair flopping over his round glasses, but there was something about his eyes. They were too sharp, too focused for the persona he was trying to display. Nico, on the other hand, didn't appear to be picking up on any of this. "Do you know everyone in this town?" he asked Cindy. "Apparently so." She glared at the newcomer. He shook his head. "And you're not even going to introduce me? That's a little bit rude." "No offense, but I met you 2.5 years ago for 2 minutes, and that meeting ended with me in a mental ward for 3 months." "Fair point." He nodded. Lila paused mid-breath. This man was clearly the demon they were looking for, and if Cindy had met him 2 years ago... She nodded to herself, the pieces falling together. A brief glance over to Nico revealed that he had come to the same conclusion. "The name's Cowell," the demon continued, "and I'm the proprietor of this establishment." He turned to Nico. "I believe you are—" Lila froze as his tongue closed around the first syllable of Nico's name. The pub seemed fairly empty, but who knew who could be listening at this very moment? "Looking for me," he said instead, seeming to enjoy the momentary panic that had sprouted on their faces. "That's right," Nico recovered quickly. "We spoke over the phone. I'm very interested in this place and all the things you've got inside of it." Cowell simply seemed bemused from the many inches of height he had on Nico. "Ah, I see. A connoisseur of the more obscure trinkets, are you, More of a businessman, I'd say." Nico matched his tone with ease. Cowell nodded. "Then let's talk in my office, shall we?" He beckoned Nico to the back curtain, but quickly stepped in front of it as Lila, and Cindy a little more hesitantly, tried to follow. He intoned. "I don't just let anyone back here, you know." Frowning, Nico stared at Cowell for a moment, trying to read the vague smile, but he quickly gave up. "Cindy," he asked, "you gotta do a little catch-up with your bro, yeah?" She looked a little relieved and nodded. "Good. But Lila's with me." It was now Cowell's turn to eye Nico. He seemed just on the cusp of refusing, but then smirked a little and nodded. "All right, then. The two of you follow me." Across the pub, Cindy watched them disappear behind the curtain. With anyone else, she would have been worried, but this was Lila, after all, and Nico was no slouch either. After a moment, she turned back to Tommy, who had been polishing the same glass for about 10 minutes now. "Sorry I didn't call," he muttered finally, after they sat in silence for a minute. "I was worried, you know," she admitted, "that you just disappeared again, or worse, that I'd never see you again." Tommy looked up from his glass. "It sounds like you and Mom and Mike have a nice life now, one that I'm not a part of, and I would just bring back memories." Though she nodded, Cindy still wasn't fully convinced. "You saw Dad, yeah?" "Yeah." "You're not like him, you know. I know you worry that you are." She neglected to elaborate why she was certain of this. "There's someone else you take after, but it's not Mom either. I don't know who it is." "Thanks." Even if she didn't, Tommy seemed to know who she was referring to, and he brightened up a little. "Look," she sighed, "I see what you mean about coming back from the dead and all, so I'll make you a deal. I won't tell Mom you're here, but in return you need to tell me the whole story, where you've been all these years, all of it." Tommy paused, staring off into the distance for a moment, before he finally nodded. "All right, deal. But I can't just tell you. I kinda have to show you. Once Cal comes back, I'll see if I can get off early." And so they waited. They would be waiting a while, because back in the office there were some complications. Cowell led Nico and Lila down the black hallway and into the last door on the left. Lila's hand twitched, ready for anything as the door opened into a small, cozy office. The only off thing about the whole affair was the shelves upon shelves of jars containing, what else? Souls. They were of all colors and consistencies, some adrift peacefully, while others almost seemed to be fighting to break free. "Fascinating, isn't it?" Cowell said suddenly, after he noticed Nico and Lila's transfixed gazes, "how each one is so unique. I sometimes take them just because I'm curious about what they look like, and taste like," he added, grinning to himself. He didn't seem aware of just how odd that sounded. "Funny," he continued. "Most people are a bit scared once they find out what's in those jars, but not you two, eh?" Nico scoffed, drawing his gaze away. "After the things we've seen, this is downright calming." He plopped down in the chair in front of the desk without waiting to be invited. "But neither of us are starry-eyed kids you can con out of our essences or whatever the hell. We're here for business." Yes, of course." Cowell grinned, sitting as well, "the young mob heir striking off on his own to prove to them all that he too can construct an empire with his own two hands. Thrilling stuff, really, though the plotline's been done before, never with this specific occult twist." Raising an eyebrow, Nico shook his head. "Whatever you say, pal. Now, it seems to me that you got a lot of souls, hanging around. I could take some off your hands, cut you a real nice deal." Lila remained standing and listened with half an ear as she continued to glance around the room. She had never had a mind for this business stuff like Nico, so she let him work his magic while she prepared to back his honeyed words with steel, if necessary. The souls were really quite mesmerizing. They seemed to be in a bizarre half-state between liquid and gas, though some leaned more one way than the other, floating in their jars like hair immersed in water. But now something else caught her attention, a small mahogany cabinet opposite the desk. She narrowed her eyes, attempting to see past the frosted glass, but to no avail. When a lull appeared in the negotiations, Lila took her chance. "Forgive me," she said, "but what's in there?" She gestured to the offending case. "Ah." Cowell's smile grew even wider. "That's where I keep the more interesting things I've collected over the years." "Do you mind?" she asked, reaching with trepidation towards the cabinet. "Be my guest." The door swung open with a quiet creak, and Lila frowned at the contents beyond. Small glass bottles glowed in the pale light, each containing something. They looked a bit like the souls, vapory and translucent, but these things had different textures to them. Lila picked up one of the vials. On it was a thin paper label which read in a scratchy hand, "Loyalty, Matilda Blanchett, 2017. Inside, the Loyalty glowed a soft pink, but there seemed to be something darker at the center, almost like a heartbeat. "Loyalty?" she asked. "What does that mean?" Cowell rose to join her at the cabinet. "It's all the little bits of people I've collected, things they can, but probably shouldn't live without. Bit of a macabre hobby, but there it is. Courage, knowledge, fear, I've taken them all. Oh, this one's my favorite." He pointed at one of the taller, thinner vials. "A teenage girl's perspective. A genius move, if I do say so myself." Immediately, Lila and Nico caught each other's eye. A teenage girl missing her perspective. They knew someone who fit that description. Without words, a plan was formed. Why don't you tell me about this? Nico interrupted. I know a lot of people who would pay big bucks for something like that. Come on, let's get back to business. As Cowell turned his attention away from Lila, she took the split-second chance and snatched the vial before closing the cabinet, then focused once more on the conversation. All seemed to go well. Cowell didn't spare even a glance in her direction. Eventually, Nico and Cowell came to an arrangement, and just like that, Cowell became part of the ever-growing supply chain. Those acquaintances of Nico's that were willing to pay for genuine human souls would finally get them. What they were actually going to do with them, Lila didn't even want to guess. Nico and Cowell stood and shook hands. We'll be in touch. Nico smirked. I wait with anticipation. Turning to leave, Lila followed Nico to the door. She finally felt herself begin to relax. This had been a highly successful endeavor, after all. By the way, Cowell said, and Lila's heart sank right back down as she heard the smile in his voice. She had relaxed too soon. That bottle you've got in your pocket isn't what you think it is. What are you... Nico desperately tried to say something, but Cowell simply held up a hand, staring intently at Lila, and Nico fell silent. Check the label. Hesitantly, Lila pulled the vial from her jeans pocket. Inside, the only thing she could see was an almost clear sheet, slightly tinted a rose color, almost the most solid thing in Cowell's collection. She turned it over in her hand and read the faded paper. Perspective, Agnes May, 1975. Nico leaned over and stared at it as well. Wait, this isn't... he began, before he realized what he was saying and shut his mouth. Your friends? Cowell continued for him. Afraid not. Lila took a step towards him, her face set. Where is Cindy's vial? We know you have it, she growled. I don't know what you're talking about. His smile said that he knew exactly what they were talking about. Bullshit, Nico stepped in. We know you're the demon she made a deal with, you bastard. I don't have it. Oddly, it seemed as if he was telling the truth. What? Nico asked. I never had it to begin with. Cowell shrugged. You can't take someone's perspective if they can already see the truth. You just need to give them a little push. But why? Lila shook her head. Why would you just ruin her life like that? I wouldn't say I really ruined it, per se, Cowell grinned. I mean, I'd say that you two are probably the closest friends she's had in years, and believe me, you'll see someday. Now, if you'd kindly hand me back poor Agnes May's perspective, thank you, then I'll show you out. I've had quite a bit of excitement for one day. Grabbing both of their shoulders, he guided Nico and Lila out of the office and back to the pub, and a silent vow was passed between them. Don't tell Cindy. After everything she'd been through, finding out that it had all been a lie, well, they weren't sure what she would do. Nico made a mental note to not get the ingredients for too big a fire amulet. He did not want to be witness to that explosion. Better to wait until the time was right. We'll, get out of your hair, then, Nico said. Real pleasure. Oh, no. Cowell's smile grew even broader. The pleasure's all mine.